Hello, my name's Harry, and in this video I'll be discussing the Map Creator tool I wrote with MAXScript, and we're going to be talking about how to load the script into 3ds Max, how to make a very slight edit to the script if you want to. I'll also talk about the functionality of the script, and lastly some of its limitations. So if you have got the zip file on your desktop or wherever, you can just extract the file and then drag and drop it into the 3ds Max scene, and that will load it into 3ds Max. However, that's not what I'm going to do straight away. First of all, I'm going to make a slight edit to it, or at least I'm going to show you how to make a slight edit to it if you need to. So to make a slight edit to it, I'm going to come down to the bottom left hand corner and I'm going to open up the MAXScript editor. So you just right click in the area which says MAXScript Mini Listener and say Open Editor Window. And then from here you can open up the Map Creator tool. So I've just got it here. And the reason I opened it I'm going to show you how to make a slight edit to it is because the category for this script is set to Harry's. And obviously that's because I wrote it and that's my category. However, you might have a category which has a bunch of tools that you've downloaded from the internet or you've created yourself. So it might be more convenient for you to add this script to your own personalized category. So to do that, it's very easy. You just obviously change this section to whatever you want. However, for my purposes, this is fine and I'm going to leave it as it is. So now we can load the script into 3ds Max through the MAXScript editor by just clicking anywhere inside the editor window and pressing Ctrl E, and that will evaluate the entire script. Okay, so that's it pressed, and that is equivalent to selecting the MAXScript file and then dragging and dropping it into the viewport. So now that we've done that, we can just close down this window. I'll maximize the window here. And now if we go to customize user interface, we should see that there's a category called Harry's and the Map Creator tool has been loaded. However, at the moment the tool doesn't have a keyboard shortcut applied to it. It's not in any toolbars or quad menus. So I'm going to assign a keyboard shortcut, so that's probably the easiest way to access it. And I know that Shift Q is the the shortcut for rendering. So a relevant shortcut might be Alt Shift Q, and that's not assigned to anything, so that's what I'll assign it to. So just click that and then close the window. So now when we press Alt Shift Q, you see that the Map Creator dialog window appears. So I'm going to do a very small demonstration of how you'd create map passes the traditional way, just so we can actually see the functionality of this script a bit better. So I'm going to go to the Render Elements tab. I'm going to add a map pass, and let's create a few objects to include in our map passes. So I'll just create a box, and I'll copy this out 4 times, so we have 5 objects in total. So the traditional way that you'd create a map pass is you go to add your map pass, and then you enable one of these checkboxes, material ID, object ID, or you can either select your objects through this exclude include window, and then that's it included into the map pass. Now my script is based on object IDs. The reason for this is because not all objects always have materials applied to them. So you might render out a map pass and some objects might not be included in them, unfortunately. And also this include exclude I should say window is heavily dependent on naming of objects. So if you have a large scene, I just found it more convenient to work with object IDs rather than having to name all my objects, so that when I come to add them to map passes, I have to select them through here or rename them before I can assign them to a map pass. So that's why the my Map Creator tool is based on object IDs. So with that in mind, what we do if we're working with object IDs is select an object ID like here and set this object ID to 1, and if we were to create another one, and we wanted a different object to be in a separate map pass, we would enable it to say 2, and place this to 2. We'd add another map pass, set it to 3, the object ID to 3, and change the object's object ID to 3 to correspond with this number down here, and so on. So you can see how long it takes to create individual separate map passes if you have several objects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set all the object IDs of these boxes back to 1, and we're going to start going over some of the functionality of this script, of this tool that I scripted. So I'm going to use actually a tool in the script to set all the object IDs back to 0, their default value. I'm going to do that just by changing this set selection ID spinner value just back down to 0. And we can check actually that they have indeed been set to 0 by using another tool, which is select objects with ID. So at the moment it's set to 1, 0, and they're all at 0. So if I just delete these map passes, and with the objects selected, if I change the mat creation method to 1 per object in selection, and then just come down, leave everything as default, and come down and say create mat render elements, you can see that it's created 5 separate render elements, and it's given them the appropriate IDs, and it's also appended the ID number on the end, so it's very quick and easy just to see which ID, which map pass relates to which object ID. And we can check in the scene that our objects have been correctly assigned to their respective IDs just by using the select objects with ID spinner. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so I'll put that back down to 0. Of course, you have another creation method which is 1 for all in selection, and what this is going to do is just take your selection and assign all the object IDs on the current objects to correspond to the ID of the newly created map pass. So you can see that if I click the create mat render elements button, it's mat ID 6, the object ID is 6 down here as well. And we can check that all of these objects now have ID 6 just using the select object with ID spinner, and indeed they do. So that's this creation method section up here. So you've got 2 options there. The map parameters buttons and text fields are just created to mimic this section down here. I deliberately made them look fairly similar just to make the users more familiar with these user interface controls. So I don't think that these need any explaining. And then at the bottom, near the bottom here, you have object ID assignment method. So by default, it assigns a unique ID to your objects in selection. So, for example, I know that because we have the ID 6 here, and if I use the select objects with ID 6, I can tell that all the objects here have ID 6. So what this is going to do, assign unique ID, is it's going to search the scene and it's going to find the highest ID number in all the objects, which is 6, and then it's going to add 1 to it to make 7, and that is going to be the ID which is assigned to the newly created map pass. Okay, so what I mean by that is if I select all these objects with 1 for all in selection and assign unique ID, if I just click on create mat render elements, so it's got 7 there. So it's adding 1 onto the highest to create a unique ID. You also have this, well, before I go on to the user specified ID, this assign unique ID works with the 1 per object in selection as well, like you saw before. So it started at 1 and then it increments to however many is in your selection. So each time it's always creating a unique ID. So 1 was unique, the highest unique ID, then it was 2. So I'll give you another example of that. So at the moment it's 7 is the highest unique ID, and then 12 now is the highest unique ID. However, now that we've created all these new mat render passes, the object IDs of these objects have been changed. So if I say select objects with ID 5, for all the way down to 0, 1, you can see there's no element in the no object in the scene with the object ID of 5. We have to go up to 8 before we actually get an object with an ID in the scene, which is in one of these passes. So this is why I created this assign user specified ID. It just allows the user to create their own ID, assign their own ID to a map pass. So if they want to, so we can just select all these boxes with one per object in selection and assign user specified ID. I know that well, I know that 3 isn't being used anymore, so I could create one with 3, and that would create these a lot of map passes down here, but they're also mirrored up here, so there's no real point in doing that. Rather, what you do is you just change the ID numbers of these boxes. However, if you want to say I don't know, 501, I'm not sure why I selected that number, but it can also generate ID numbers with really large map passes with ID numbers which are really large. Okay, so that's pretty much all of the functionality of the script explained. So now I'll discuss some of the limitations. So perhaps one of the limitations is that this script works for mental ray and scanline. I don't think it works for V-Ray or any other third-party renderers because I believe that they have their own method for creating map passes. So that's one limitation. Another limitation is the fact that if you use the one per object in selection and you save your map passes using this button here, you might get some problems. And I'll show you why that happens. If I just go to desktop and say test and save as a JPEG and say save. With all of these in my selection and I say create map render elements, what you can see is all of these render elements are being saved to the same place. So what's going to happen is you're going to have the map pass with the ID number 13 is going to be saved, but then the map pass with ID number 14 is going to be saved, and that's going to overwrite this pass. And this is going to happen all the way down until ID 17, and nothing's going to save over 17. So that's the only element which is map pass which is going to be saved. So if you are using the one per object in selection and you want to save your elements, I'd still recommend you use this saving method down here in the actual render elements tab of the render setup dialog window. Another thing that you might find confusing at first, if I just remove this and save another copy, let's just say call it my test this time, and I create it. So I have assigned it an output path, but the output path doesn't actually appear here. The reason for this is just because the script works by applying the output path after the render element is created. So to get around this, all you have to do is click off the render element and then click back on it, and it's there. Okay, and this is just a visual thing. It doesn't actually affect how the elements are rendered out. They'll still render out fine, but it's just a purely visual thing. Okay, so that's all the limitations, the functionality explained, and how you can load the script and how you can make a slight edit to it. That's all explained now. So I think that's everything. So I hope you enjoy the script and get some good use out of it. Thank you.